Welcome to Season 5 of the Manufacturers Network. Real talk with the people building what's next in manufacturing. And now your host, Lisa Ryan.
Hey, it's Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. Excited to introduce our guest today, Friddy Hoegner. Friddy helps manufacturing and supply chain leaders build teams that actually keep operations moving. As a former I'm going to start that again. Procurement.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. Excited to introduce our guest today, Friddy Hoegner. Friddy helps manufacturing and supply chain leaders and teams actually keep Okay. One more time and that's it.
Well, I like to have my editing team. They can just fix it for me. It happens.
Well, you know what? And I can do that, but if I just have a good opening paragraph, then it saves me the editing. So I will slow myself down and do it better. Hey, it's Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Friddy Hoegner. Friddy helps manufacturing and supply chain leaders build teams that actually keep operations moving. As a former procurement leader turned founder of Scope Recruiting, he works with manufacturers across the U.S. to hire and retain the kind of talent that makes automation, culture, and growth possible. So, Friddy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
So share with us a little bit about your background and what led you to doing what you do.
Yeah, happy to. I started my career in Germany with AB in a global rotational program in supply chain. Eventually ended up, ABB bought Thomas & Betts in 2012, something like that. So I ended up at Thomas & Betts when that transition was happening. I became a global commodity manager within Thomas & Betts. And then a supply chain manager with a small furniture manufacturer in North Carolina that was owned by Kohler at the time. And really, my wife actually got into supply chain recruiting before we started Scope. So 2 years before we started Scope, she had a similar background to myself. She got into supply chain recruiting with a boutique supply chain recruiting firm. However, she quickly realized that she was the only one there who actually had the hands-on experience in supply chain. While there was a boutique firm, all of them had an HR and recruiting background. So she was very successful in the role. And we decided, you know what, there's a real need for recruiters to speak the language. And I think that's just been reaffirmed over the years. We have a lot of clients and candidates come to us and say, hey, it's refreshing to talk to somebody who actually understands what I'm doing. And on the flip side with clients, they come to us and say, hey, you actually understand what we need, you understand what we're looking for, and you were able to deliver. So really, that's the first step in all of this is understanding what are we targeting, who are we looking to hire, and then being able to identify those candidates. So we started Scope Recruiting in 2017, really with that idea that all of the recruiters we wanted to bring in had a supply chain background, and we teach them the recruiting side of the business instead of trying to teach a recruiter the supply chain industry.
So that must be really interesting working with your wife. So you have besides making each other, the business successful, also keeping the marriage intact.
Yeah, she's taken a step back now. We have 3 little children. She's taking a little break from recruiting for now, but especially in those early years, yes, there was a new marriage, new business that you're running together. You find out quickly if this is going to work or not.
I was going to say, my husband works from home 2 days a week. And on those days, I'm like, aren't you going to go to the office today?
Yeah, I think staking out clear responsibilities and who is responsible for what makes a big difference. So you don't step on each other's feet and everybody knows what is expected and who is responsible for which portion of the business.
Dealing with as long as you have with manufacturers and with the hiring that they're doing, what are some of the mistakes that you're seeing that manufacturers are making right now that are really hurting retention on the shop floor?
Yeah, I think it starts with the hiring process. Hiring the wrong people then leads to bad retention. And I think for a lot of the roles and a lot of the clients we work with, they come to us and they have a generic job description, but they haven't really thought through the role with all the stakeholders, right? What does 6 month success look like? What does 12-month success look like? What does that person actually need to do in this job to be successful? And make sure that's discussed and agreed on within the organization. We see it happens all the time, right? Where a hiring manager says, okay, let's take a supply chain role. I'm looking for somebody with a strong procurement and demand planning background. And then it goes up a step and the director of operations says, actually, we need somebody who can do logistics. So that connect happens quite a bit within organizations. So we always want our clients to sit with us and ideally bring all the stakeholders and map out an ideal candidate profile, right? If we could draw up a candidate, what would that candidate look like? What was their skills? What is their experience? And what does success look like? And based on that, we can put together a much more nuanced job description where we really spell out, this is what you actually have to do in this role and what you need to do to be successful. And I think that's the first step where a lot of companies go wrong already, because they went with a generic job description. They went with not a clear idea of what we're targeting into the hiring process. And that makes evaluating candidates a lot harder if you don't have that work done up front, because there's candidates that can be very impressive in interviews and very convincing, but when you dig down on it, they might not actually be what you need. So I think the single biggest mistake is not having a clearly defined ideal candidate profile, and then a consistent method on how to score those candidates. So we always submit a scorecard with each candidate we submit where we're saying, this is how they rank against this ideal candidate profile. And that gives us a somewhat unbiased way of evaluating candidates. I think without that, right, it's always a little bit subjective and always, we see that in ourselves, right? If I talk to somebody today and I will talk to that person a week from now, depending on what's going on, if I had 4 other interviews just before that, I might evaluate that candidate different. So having a scorecard and a somewhat structured way to handle those interviews, I think is really important and really helpful in making sure you don't miss good candidates and you actually end up with the right candidate.
Yeah, and when you look at things, I remember this was years ago, I was working with a client, and what you said, the realistic expectations, they know what they're coming into, they know what their responsibilities are. And so I was talking to a client, and she was like, if we tell those people exactly what their days will look like, nobody will ever show up. I'm like, there's a problem.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, that I think that you're seeing is people can go on AI and say, how do I perfectly answer these interview questions? And ChatGPT will give them the full outline. But unless you can ask the right questions about behaviors and about actions and everything to protect yourself from that and to have the right scorecards, because again, you want to make sure that you're bringing the right person on the bus right off the bat.
And I think that's where that supply chain background that we have comes in handy, right? Because candidates can make their resumes look fantastic. That first interview question they can prepare for, but when you start digging and you actually know what the job is supposed to do and you actually know what the role looks like hands-on, and you go, right, 1 follow-up question, 2 follow-up questions, right, deep, you're not going to be able to prepare for that with ChatGPT, though. That's really where that knowledge shows. Do you just have hand knowledge, or do you just have general idea of how this is supposed to work? But when it comes down to implementing and being able to actually drive and lead those initiatives, do you actually know what it looks like in detail?
Exactly. So, speaking of AI, so how should plant managers rethink hiring as automation and AI become more integrated into daily operations?
Yeah, great question. And I think this is one of those things where nobody can predict what it's going to look like in 5 years. So what 2. And what we always tell our clients, especially when clients come in and say, hey, we need to have this specific industry background and they're hiring for a specific set of knowledge and skills, I think especially now it creates issues down the road because things are changing. So you don't really need the candidate that knows the construction industry or the pharmaceutical industry in and out. You need the candidate who can adapt to a changing environment. You need the candidate with the right aptitude, with the right drive, and with the right willingness to adopt change and to pivot. And because we don't know what manufacturing is going to look like and how big the impact of AI is going to be, right? I think instead of hiring for a narrow set of skills, you're much better off trying to find the right culture fit, the right personality, the right mental aptitude, and with a general set of experience that can be applied to different solutions and to different problems and provide solutions. So I think having a flexible workforce that is able to react to tariffs, to COVID outbreaks, to natural disasters, bridges collapsing, or AI disrupting everything, I think that agility and that ability to adapt is more important than ever.
Absolutely. So if you were to get out your crystal ball for a couple minutes, what do you think that a future-ready manufacturing team actually looks like in practical terms?
Yeah, I think it's hard to answer in a general because industries, right? There's industries where AI and automation and robotics will have a much bigger impact than other industries, right? I think Amazon is trying to be fully automated within their warehouses and eliminate all those people in those warehouses. And I do think there's a realistic chance that will happen over the next 3, 4, 5 years. Within manufacturing, it's obviously a little bit more complicated. So I do think to be cost competitive, and I saw that 12 years ago when I was with ABB. The location I was with, they were making miniature circuit breakers. And they had a factory in Indonesia, they had a factory in Argentina, I think, and they had a factory in Germany. And they were all producing at the same cost because there were no people in that factory. You had a few engineers walking around making sure the equipment didn't break down, and you had a few maintenance people. But overall, there was a football field-sized factory that was producing those products for the same cost in Germany as in all the other countries. So I think we will see more of that. And I think AI will, especially in the white collar jobs, will have a huge impact on efficiencies, and it will allow people, I think, to get to the decision-making process or the decision-making part of problems much quicker. We don't have to spend as much time digging through data, analyzing things. AI will be a huge help in providing that analysis for us. I think for people within manufacturing, they need to know the limitations of AI. They need to know and understand how they can utilize it. But in the end, I think it will allow people to make business cases much quicker where they say, hey, AI allows us to do things that we hadn't been able to do before. Here's the business case. Is that something the business wants to do? So I think the communication, the stakeholder alignment, working cross-functional, and working with AI will be hugely important in the future.
Absolutely. I think that we see so many headlines with what the white collar bloodbath going on with companies just dumping a lot of white collar workers because of AI taking over. And that's really because you still need the humans behind to put in the right prompts to get the right information that goes in there. I know for myself, it has just made a huge difference in my day-to-day operations because it's getting rid of a lot of I don't want to call it grunt work, the stuff that would take hours, and now it gives you the opportunity to use more of your creativity than just admin skills to get this out. Yeah.
Right, and I think the question is going to be, are those companies trying to keep those people on and maybe increase efficiency and provide value that those people just didn't have time to provide before? Or are the companies happy with keeping the status quo and just replacing those people with AI but don't have growth, right? Instead of, okay, those people now do have 30, 40% more capacity to do other things that they didn't have before. I think there's a very big chance that those people can provide additional value to the company and increase efficiency, increase revenue, increase profit that they just didn't have the time to before. We will see which way it goes.
Yeah, I know. None of us know, even, like I said, 2 years into the future. So when it comes to one of the questions that I get asked so much, because there's so many different business models and types of staffing. You have your plant staff, you have your remote planners, you have your operations leaders, you have people working hybrid, people working split shifts. So how are you seeing leaders build their culture across a workforce that really includes all of the above?
Yeah, and we have a great client who does exactly that. There is roles that just have to be on site. There's no way around it. But they understand and realize the value of offering remote and hybrid where possible, because it does give you a huge advantage over other companies. There's a lot of companies who've gone back to fully in office. And if you are able to offer remote, I think it gives you really a leg up in the talent market. It is probably the single biggest lever you have in the talent market over salary, over anything else. Being able to offer remote roles where it makes sense is a huge deal. And that company we're working with there, right? The people that have to be on site are on site, but the people who can be remote are remote. And it allows them to get better talent, but then they make sure they have the right company culture in place. And that's lived down from the top. And it's a hiring decision. It's also a firing decision, right? It's not only on paper saying those are our values and this is what we're looking for. It's people who stray outside of that company culture, they are letting go. And it's a huge part of the hiring process as well, to make sure that, because there is a level of responsibility that comes with it when people are remote, right? They're not in the office, they're not 8 to 5. So how do you ensure it, right? You have to evaluate those people differently than people who are in the office, right? And ideally, you should evaluate people in the office that way too, but it's really more goal-oriented. These are the outcomes we're looking for. And then you trust those people to achieve those outcomes and get there. And there's no way of micromanaging them, right? You can't go by the office, see what they're doing, what are they working on. You have to trust them that they are doing the right thing. And I think bringing people in quarterly and create that sense of community is important. But then also, how do you structure performance evaluations? And how do you make sure that you hire the people that you can trust to do the job without seeing them on a daily basis?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really glad you brought up firing too, because nobody likes to do that, but we also have results that we need to do. And from a results standpoint, you know that you're going to have remote workers or actually any workers that will take advantage of you. They will jack the system. They will figure out ways to get around. But unfortunately, we treat, maybe that's 3 to 5% of the workforce, but we treat the 95 to 97% of our good, honest, hardworking people like they're going to take advantage of us. So if we can get rid of the people who are toxic or not doing the work or obviously taking advantage of the system, it does overall create a much better workplace. And sometimes we just can't afford to keep those toxic because our best people are going to quit because of them.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
And I think that's typically, those are the people who can tell you. The people in the departments working with them, they know exactly who they are. And it's sometimes hard to recognize as a manager or something. But if you talk to those people that are working with them, they know exactly who those people are.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you seeing as far as some of the biggest red flags during interviews that can signal that somebody's not going to thrive in that manufacturing environment or in that particular role?
2 things I would say. One is a little bit the my way or the highway attitude, right? I think a lot of times people have learned things, they have seen stuff, and they think when they go somewhere new that they're just going to copy what they have done before and going to push that through and say, I know this has worked, so it has to work here. A lot of times that creates a lot of issues once they get there, when they're not sensible to maybe the differences that are in one facility compared to the other facility. There's a sensitivity that's required to get buy-in from everybody who's involved in the process and to making sure they buy into that change. I think, and you can hear that in interviews a little bit, where people are very, very confident in their solutions. It's not like, this is not a problem. I've seen this before. I've done this before. It's not a big deal, right? That kind of attitude, I think a lot of times creates a lot of issues. The other one is the inability to get specific. When people say, yeah, we have done this, or we did this here, and then you ask about, okay, what was your responsibility? How did you do this? What exactly were the steps you took? And they struggle to get into the weeds. I think those are the two biggest red flags we see.
And a lot of that comes from your questioning. Instead of your background, tell me about a time when you did this, when you had a bad experience with a customer, or tell me about a time that you had to have a difficult conversation with an employee. And when you're doing behavior-based types of interview questions, I think that's going to get them to talk in the weeds so you can see if they actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah, agreed.
With all of the companies that are out there, we know that the greatest percentage of our manufacturing in this country is small to medium manufacturers. So how can these smaller companies compete for skilled talent when they're up against bigger brands with bigger budgets?
Yeah, great questions again, and something we see almost daily. We rarely work with the big companies. Most of the time we're working with mid-market, family-owned businesses. And what we're looking for most of the time is candidates, especially in leadership positions, candidates who have had the training, who know the methodology, who have seen best practices, who've seen maybe how the Fortune 500 or some of those larger organizations do it, but they can adapt to these smaller style companies where it's much more hands-on. You have the responsibility, right? There's not a team of engineers that does all the work. There's not a team of analysts who analyzes the data for you. It's that hands-on leadership that you need in smaller organizations where you just pick up whatever needs to get done, right? And having both of those experience, I think, is always the sweet spot there, but I lost track. What was the question? I apologize.
How are manufacturers competing for skilled talent when they're up against bigger brands?
I do think what the smaller companies offer is, to that same notion, is the ability to affect change much quicker, right? A lot of times leaders in larger organizations are frustrated with the bureaucracy. They're frustrated with the pace. It takes 20 people to make a decision. So highlighting the ability to truly affect change and to make an impact within those smaller companies is a lot of times what attracts people from those larger organizations to go to smaller organizations and say, hey, I can talk directly to the owner, or I can talk directly to the president, and we can change something in a day that would take a month in some of these larger companies. So I think that's really attractive to a lot of candidates. And I think one of the biggest, because like you said, you won't be competing on salary. You're probably not competing on benefits or anything like that. It really comes down to the opportunity to make an impact. I think that's the biggest attractor we see in smaller companies to get those talent, especially the ones, right, who have been on both sides of the aisle. A lot of times they come back and say, I can't take the bureaucracy, and I much rather work with a smaller organization where I feel value too. I think a lot of times the larger organizations are very corporate. So having a company culture that values the people within it and gives them the freedom and the trust to make decisions is what attracts those candidates.
Yeah. It's funny, as I think about the very beginning of my career, I was an executive recruiter and sold salespeople. I think that it's helped a lot in what I'm doing now as far as just knowing what it takes to remove a person from a company or place them in another company. But when I was doing it, there wasn't the so many sources between Indeed and LinkedIn and Monster and AI and everything. So as a recruiter, if I am a hiring manager and I'm looking at all of these different things and a wide variety of cost from free to X% of a first-year compensation, now what are the benefits of still going the route of working with a recruiter?
I do think, for one, we don't rely on job posts. So we have access to talent that's not out there applying to jobs. I think that's a huge bonus, and that if you want to do that internally, you have to have dedicated resources who have the network and who are able to reach out to candidates who are not out there browsing the job boards. And we see that the majority of the top 10% of talent, right, they're not out there and applying. A lot of times they get recruited from one job to the other. So there's people who've never once in their life had to apply for a job post. And that's the type of candidates we target and we always try to identify for our clients. And it takes a lot of grind and grunt work again to, right, where we reach out to 100 candidates that are passive, that are not applying. And out of those 100, maybe 15, 20 respond and say, hey, I'm interested in having a conversation. And out of those 10 or 15, you narrow it down further. So you might have 3 or 4 who you actually submit. So it's a time-intensive process to find those candidates that aren't job hopping every 2 years, that are true performers within their organizations. And I think while you can get fortunate and find those candidates on job boards every now and then, especially in more rural locations or for smaller organizations, they struggle to get those top quality candidates applying to their job posts.
So as we're getting to the end of our time together, if you had one of your best tips or favorite tips for making good hiring decisions that we haven't already covered today, what would that be?
I would say when you find the right candidate, don't hesitate. If you've mapped out your candidate profile and you know what you're looking for, and the first candidate you come across checks all of the boxes, don't be afraid to pull the trigger, right? Because those candidates, they're rare and you don't want to lose them in the process. So don't say, I have to interview 3 more because I have to interview 3 more candidates. If you have a clearly defined candidate profile and you find that person, don't hesitate to pull the trigger.
I would say that is a mic drop. So if somebody did want to continue the conversation with you, find out a little bit more about what you do, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, find us on our website, scoperecruiting.com. My email is on there. My contact information is on there. You can find us. And we have a lot of helpful material on there as well about hiring processes, candidate scorecards, how to update your LinkedIn profile if you're looking to be found by recruiters. So a lot of helpful tips on there as well.
All right, Friddy, it was an absolute pleasure getting to know you today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much.
I'm Lisa Ryan, and this is the Manufacturers Network Podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Manufacturers Network Podcast. If this conversation gave you something to think about, share it with someone else who will get it. And hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next.